Just Branding. Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Just Branding. Today we have fellow Aussie Julian Cole with us. Julian is a strategy consultant for global brands such as Apple, Facebook, and Disney. Previously, he's held the role of head of comms planning at BBDO, has helped create award-winning work for PlayStation, Pepsi, Google, and after looking at his rap sheet, pretty much the whole Global 100. He's got a ton of experience. So Julian's also a strategy coach. And in 2017, he founded the Planning Dirty Academy, which helps agency strategists improve their craft by getting their hands dirty. So if you didn't pick it up, Julian comes from an ad agency comms background, which is a little different to some of the previous guests we've had on Just Branding, who've come from more of like a creative design background, which is why we're stoked to have Julian on the show. Today, we're going to be talking about creative briefs and the fundamentals of strategy, so you can gain confidence in your strategic abilities and ultimately have a bigger impact on your company. So welcome to the show, Julian.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a chat.
Awesome. Well, I'm curious, how did you get to where you are today? How did you become a strategist?
Yeah, so I was doing an internship at the start of my career at an agency called Naked Communications. And that was kind of my big break into strategy. They were a communication consultancy. So they sat above media and creative agencies and had the idea of putting creative and media back together, because in ad agencies, the media agency and the creative agencies are split. So it was a kind of a pretty big idea at the time. And I started there and kind of learned a lot from them. I then went on to be part of kind of digital strategy, and then came up to communications planning, which was kind of doing the creative strategy at big creative agencies. I moved to New York, and that's where I was heading up the communications planning department of BBDO and BBH over there. So working in kind of big agencies, BBDO was 800 people, and in the strategy department there, and specifically in communications planning. So there's a lot of different variants of planning within a creative agency, and communications planning is the person who's there to kind of make sure the creative and the media are kind of connected and stay together.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'd love to jump into those definitions because, there's a lot of ambiguity between all of them. We are more of a business strategy, comms background, where we both come from the design background, as well as many of our listeners as well. So could you just let our listeners, how you define strategy and comms planning and perhaps brand strategy as well?
Yeah, for sure. So within a creative agency, an ad agency that's doing an output of kind of a whole integrated campaign, so they're doing TV, digital, out-of-home, radio, you name it. There usually is a brand strategist to begin with, and their role might be a little different from design brand strategists, because what their role is specifically to sit between the client and the creative and write the creative brief. And so where I think design brand strategists are usually also creating the work, the brand strategist that sits in a creative agency is really just writing the creative brief. So they're going quite deep on that subject. So they're usually doing a lot of qual and quant, and they've usually got big databases which they're kind of pulling data from and insights about the kind of consumer. So that's one side of it, brand strategy. And I would sit over on some key accounts, I'd sit over the top of both the brand strategist and the comms planner. Comms planner for me was, once the idea is formed, the way we look at it is with an integrated campaign, there's usually multiple messages. You're not just one message to the audience, there's multiple. So working out which message through which medium you're going to do, and kind of putting that whole plan together and making sure the creatives are using the different mediums in the right way and they understand how to use the medium. That was my job as a communications planner. So it's bringing strategic rigor to the implementation process. And usually in there, they've got big deals. So Spotify will come and say, hey, you've spent $5 million with us. Here's an extra 500,000. Let's come up with a creative idea that lives over the top of the Spotify ecosystem. And so we would come in and brief that back into our creative teams as well. So that was the job of the comms planner and the brand strategist. And I think in that, we're usually working more at the campaign level. So these campaigns are usually, you're probably starting somewhere between like $1 million to $10 million in production dollars. And what you're doing there is just ensuring that the brand strategy is coming to life in the right way for that campaign. So we're building on that idea. And sometimes we might be upfront with defining that brand strategy, or sometimes, big brands like Unilever and P&G have got that already sorted, and we might be playing a role in that, but not always leading that part of the job.
Awesome. Yeah, it's fascinating to hear all the differences, because we haven't really talked about that side of strategy in terms of comms planning before. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper in terms of examples. You mentioned Spotify, but like, what's the process? In terms of a client coming to you, do you talk with clients, or like what's it look like behind the scenes? What's going on? Love to hear that.
Yeah. So usually we're usually being serviced on, we're doing like agency of records. So that will be, you buy full-time employees, like FTEs at an agency. So there'll be like a $5 million, you're like, hey, we're going to spend $5 million in production. And usually it's about the same amount on overheads in terms of staff. So you'll spend $5 million on staff. Then in that, they'll go, we're going to have 3 campaigns this year or 4 campaigns this year. And we will be part, as comms planners, part of the annual planning. So we'll say, okay, one of the brands I worked on is Bacardi. You've got these 4 big campaigns. So you've got a big summer campaign, you've got a campaign around Halloween, and then one around the holiday season. So what we'll do is then we'll know that we've got to write creative briefs for those, and then I'll need to work out the integrated plans on that. And so there'll be usually a client brief that will get sent to us, which will be the business problem, the target consumer, which we've done the research with the client, the budget, and then the key kind of timings. We're then taking that and translating that into a creative brief for the creative team. So that will be taking that and translating it into what's the key consumer problem at this moment, what's the consumer goal, and what's the single-minded message that we're going to use for this campaign to make sure that it kind of delivers on the result of the goal of what we're trying to do. And our job is then to brief, and we'll be working with the creative director, and the creative director will then have about maybe like 3 to 6 teams underneath them of a copywriter and art director. And we'll brief that in and negotiate what the brief looks like. And then they'll brief in like 6 different teams, and then they'll be all working to get to the big creative idea first. So they'll be developing ideas, and most of them will die, usually go like through 3 rounds of revisions. And that will then get presented to the client, and that's the idea platform. And then once we're locked on that, I will come through, I'll have done this a little earlier, come through with a communications framework, which is working out the specific messages at different times. And then I'll have worked with the media agency, who will have locked in these big deals with kind of the TV networks or radio, or, as we were saying before, the digital platforms. And I'll work out what briefs I need to write to the team. So once we've locked on the big idea platform, I'll have like 6 to 10 briefs to get the whole integrated campaign working together. So that's my job as a comms planner. Or I sometimes do the whole process as well, or oversee the whole process.
Can I ask about this? Sorry to interrupt, but you said the idea platform. So where does this idea come from?
It comes from the creative team. So the creative team will be coming up off the creative brief. They'll be coming up with an idea platform. So for instance, when we're on PlayStation, we had the idea there. This was to relaunch the PlayStation 4. So I can tell you the backstory to it, because it'll probably make it easier to understand where the idea platform came. So the backstory to PlayStation 4 was the PlayStation 3 kind of bombed a little bit. It didn't kind of get the pickup in the market that they were hoping for. PlayStation 2 was a real winner. Then Xbox 360 came and stole the market. PlayStation's communication had gone to being more about a home entertainment system, and they'd left the gamers behind. And so what we realized in working with the client, we realized that we needed to come back at gamers and say, we've created a console for you. We're not going for home entertainment system. It's all about the gamer. And the insight that we landed on was that gamers were feeling at that time a lot of shame around playing games. So it was like the emotions that they have, like winning a game, is somehow seen as not as valuable as winning a sports game. So if you win with your local indoor soccer team, that's meant to be as more valuable than if you're winning at FIFA. And what we wanted to say was, no, it's actually the same. And so we got to the tagline, which was called Greatness Awaits. But the idea platform that sat underneath was we were going to invite, inspire, and challenge gamers to their greatness. And so with that idea platform, it actually has 3 pieces in there. The first is the invite, inspire, and challenge. And that comes from, and I know it's a bit controversial, like some people hate them, some people love them, but at the time PlayStation loved them, was brand archetypes. So they were seen as the magician who were always challenging the gamer to their greatness and kind of pushing them to go further. So that was what we had as the first part of it, was the invite, inspire, and challenge. Then the second bit was gamers. And so we really needed to show that gamers weren't the kind of nerds, sitting in their mum's basement. Gamers now was everyone, and it was a broad section. So in all the advertising we did, we needed to make sure we had that broad section. And then the final bit was the greatness. And that was, we needed to show that the greatness that you have in game is real. Those emotions, they're real. So we needed to kind of put those emotions at a higher level. And so if you look at all the work that lives under Greatness Awaits, it all ladders up to this, this idea platform. And so it was easy for me when I was briefing in different elements, for instance. So if you look at the video, and I'm sure we can link to it, you'll see that the initial spot that we kind of launched with was this guy who's kind of walking through the streets, and then all this crazy stuff starts to happen. The buildings kind of start falling down, and then he goes into all this, into this amazing game world. And he is the magician, inviting, inspiring gamers to their greatness. But then when we had to do it, come to life in a digital environment, what we did was okay, how do we bring that to life? So what we did was we used people's trophies that they won in games to actually win all the kind of the gaming, different gaming characters or their costumes that we had used from the TV ad. And so there you can see where the idea platform is being aligned to, because, their greatness, which was the in-game with the gaming trophies, was being recognized out of game with these once in a million kind of costumes. And so that's what an idea platform is, and that's what we'd always be kind of delivering on.
That's really interesting, Julian. Oh, hi, by the way, it's Matt here, everybody. Just really interesting to listen to you talk through that, because, what you're talking about there on a campaign level, I often use at a company-wide level, in terms of brand strategy. So, you talk about the big idea or whatever. I like my brands to have a big idea that everyone can kind of align behind. And, archetypes, I know some, as you say, some people give them a bad rap. I kind of like them personally because they align people very quickly and very simply. But what I mean is I know, Jacob, you use a little canvas, don't you? Like a brand canvas, a strategy canvas. I use different ones and flex up and down depending on the client. But it's fascinating because, what I'd be interested in understanding from your perspective is how you would differentiate between the idea framework and what you would call kind of a brand strategy framework, and if there's any difference, or whether it's just agency speak for the same thing, so in order to get the great brief to execute on. Any thoughts on that?
So I think when it comes to that, the bigger, and this comes to size as well. So the bigger you get into some of these companies, sometimes it's harder with diplomacy to have something be adopted by all departments. So if you see there's something like that, it depends. And I noticed this across different agencies different clients that I worked on, is the power that the CMO holds within the overall company. So some companies, marketing is the be all and end all, because that's the big difference. So you go to P&G or Unilever, the marketing department there is seen as like the highest of high. So something like you telling me, this is the brand strategy, and it coming from a consultancy or the CMO, I can imagine that being adopted by everyone. When you go into other organizations, so say something like a startup, where it's tech-led and engineering-led, you don't get that. It's much harder to get that adoption, especially those bigger companies. You'll notice that, like, it's their relationship with marketing versus engineering. It's, the product engineers kind of come first. So it's more of a diplomacy thing, I think, in corporate culture.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, a diplomacy thing. Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts about that? Because, if you come up with a great idea for a campaign, like you've just mentioned, the customer experience has to kind of link into that, right? So have you found, sort of as you've gone through, that you're getting asked and wheeled in to actually help with customer experience and the actual product, experience as, off the back of this? Or do you normally just kind of step off there and leave the campaign? And if it doesn't connect, you leave that to someone else in the business? Because what I found as a consultant is I used to go in and help with the sort of campaign focused stuff. And then I realized, actually, what I'm developing here is really valuable for the rest of the business. And I'd start getting invited in by like HR or innovation, departments and stuff to kind of infuse some of that thinking into their work. Have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, so I think by myself, yes, but as at bigger agencies. So yeah, BBDO and BBH are probably some of the more traditional agencies, or just, big agencies working with big organizations. I feel like the more people you've got involved in there, again, it's all back to diplomacy. The adoption's a little bit harder. So I would say at agencies, that was always the ambition. We were always wanting to impact the product and always thought that we could do a lot more. And it's just not the case. And I often tell people that if you want to have innovative change and real change in an agency, never go after the biggest client, never go after the gold standard client. Always start on the small projects, the small budgets with ambitious clients, because that's where you can actually drive that change into the product. So that example of the PlayStation example that I gave, where we were using the trophies, that was one of the hardest things to do. Like, the amount of legal loopholes we had to go through that, and the amount of other departments we were bringing in was like astronomical. Where, if you went to a small company, you'd be like, oh, the guy who looks after the trophies, that's me. I'm the marketer. I'm looking after all that part of the product. So it's just, you're playing a different game there, I think, with that size difference, or people, it's probably is the biggest thing.
If we can get into the fundamentals of strategy, because we've talked about the high level stuff, but like, what are the principles or the fundamentals of a good strategy?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of pieces to it. There's, I like the strategy means so many different things to so many different people. And we're even noticing it within the marketing world, with like designers speaking about it, consultants, and even ad agencies. So to me, there's, I like the good strategy, bad strategy definition of it, where there's 3 parts to it, which is a diagnosis, a clear, simple idea, and then a coherent actions. And so those 3 parts, to me, actually ladder up really nicely to the agency strategy process, which is the diagnosis is our research part, where we go from the client brief, which is a business perspective, to a consumer's perspective, creative brief. And so that's the research we do there. The one simple action or idea is the idea platform. And so that's coming up with the creative idea and that's usually a relationship that you're having with the creative director. You're not the one person coming up with that. And then the coherent action is the comms plan and all the integrated pieces that work around it. So that's what I see strategy within an agency environment and what the remit is. I don't try to speak for other types of strategy because I know there's so many different versions of that. But then I think what I like to speak about, because strategy is such a mystery, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. No one really knows what's happening there. I like to talk about it in really easy outputs. Just think about clear outputs of what you actually have to deliver as an agency strategist. And to me, there's a couple of things. You're usually doing a research doc, which I use as the 4 C's, which is company, culture, consumer, and category, where you're going off. And that I use it as my sketchbook of like finding all the research around those trends and putting that all together. And then getting to a creative brief, which is the output, second output, which is usually a relationship that I'm having. I'll write usually 3 different creative briefs. I'll take that to the creative director, see which one he's resonating around, he thinks is good, get that kind of signed off, and then brief in the rest of the teams. So that's my second output. The third output would be the strategy upfronts. So when we go back and present the creative, I'm doing the upfronts to really understand and sell the creative ideas if they're, on brief. And then consolidating the creative feedback and then creating the comms framework, all those kind of documents that keep everything coherent, like coherent action, keep it all integrated. So a comms framework, which is messages and media together. And then I call it a blueprint, which is pretty much an ecosystem, how everything's living together, how the different messages coming through different media. But then what I do is also put production dollars. I carve the different production dollars out through those different pieces. So they're usually the key documents. And then afterwards is a measurement or wrap report. So working with whoever the provider is and probably the media agency as well to show and evaluate how the actual campaign did. So in the creative development process, you can see those are the clear outputs: research, creative brief, strategy upfronts, idea. The one I missed there was the idea platform, comms framework, blueprint, measurement. So we've got six pieces there. So when you think about outputs, and this is what I always like to do, talk about outputs, because I can talk about all the nice fluffy things that a strategist should be. They should be curious. They need to understand research and insights, but that actually makes it really clear.
Yeah. So you're using the words output instead of deliverables. Is that a thing you've done on purpose?
No, sorry. Could call it deliverables too.
Okay, good. Yeah, in terms of output, yeah, it's funny how you talk about it. I follow a similar process in terms of like the research and the brief and the 4 C's framework, and but that kind of leads into like positioning and whatnot, at least from our brand strategy definition. So yeah, super interesting. Matt, did you have anything to add or ask?
No, not really. I think what you've sort of walked through there is how you take some of the sort of the foundational things. You talk about the 4 C's, we talk about that a lot, and really develop that through into something that is executionable on a grand scale. And that's what I think I'm learning from you right now, Julian, is the scale that you're operating at is huge.
You're scaring a lot of designers off.
Well, I don't know about. I think designers need to understand that. I think a lot of designers coming up, they're like, oh, I really want to like work on a Nike billboard, or something, or Nike, depending on which side of the pond you're on. And I think you have these dreams, and but to do that, you have to realize that billboard isn't just like there on its own. It's part of a massive integrated campaign. And that to get to work on stuff like that, it's not like just one person just kind of sits down and does it. Like there are hundreds of people involved in executing this globally, effectively. And that's what I'm learning from you right here, Julian, how that works. And yeah, like what Jacob says, it's interesting because, I've worked with some big global organizations like Nestle and Boots and kind of big companies like that over here in the UK. And but I tend to work with sort of departments within there and leadership teams to disseminate, get the core alignment around what their brand stands for, and all the stuff around insights and understanding, the consumer. Absolutely brilliant. But then what I tend to do is go, right, now we've defined that, I will then leave it to the professionals to kind of go and execute on that and kind of make that work and go to market with it. So it sounds like you fused that almost like that whole process together, Julian, into something, really, really special. So did have a quick question. Obviously you work like this for agencies. What do you kind of do now? So I get the picture, and listeners get the picture for what you're up to now.
So I'm doing pretty much strategy training. So I was doing consulting and coming in as kind of like a hired gun. So I went into Apple and Uber and Facebook, and I would go in there and work on like they'd have like a global launch of a new product, but they would have in-house teams, like creative agency. And they said, we need a strategist. We know you've got those skills in comms planning and brand. Can you come in and be the lead strategist on this global relaunch? So that's what I was doing. But now what I'm doing is specifically strategy training. So I'm training up both agency strategists, and then also a bigger part of my job is like also in-house teams. So I've just finished up jobs training the Best Buy like marketing team there. So all their strategists, so they can write better creative briefs because a lot of this work's going in-house, as well as Snapchat. And then I'm working with Facebook on rolling out a program with their agency network where I'm helping teach strategy to all agency partners. So they've got, anyone who's part of the Facebook agency network, I'll be training them there on comms planning.
Amazing. So how do you think people could get started in strategy, or at least become more strategic?
Yeah, so there's probably, if you want to get into a creative agency in a strategy role, there are a couple of books that are kind of key and essential to reading what the role of a strategist is, because you need to know if you want to do that first off. The key books would be there's a free one, which is great, which is the JWT Planning Guide, which explains the planning process. It was by the godfather of strategy, Stephen King, and it's about a 20-page PDF that's amazing. So that's a really great starting point to really understand how the advertising agency process works. The next kind of Bible on that is called Truth, Lies, and Advertising, and it was written in the 90s. And again, just a foundational book to understand how advertising agency strategists work. And then finally, the last one, and there's two that are really impacting a lot of the marketing work we do right now, which is Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow. And so understanding that, because it's really disruptive of a lot of the, way a lot of people are talking about marketing and how advertising works. He just kind of pours cold water on that and shows you the reality based in scientific rigor. And so I'd say those three are a really nice balance to start. There's another one called The Long and Short of It, which also shows how advertising works and the effectiveness behind that. So I think that they would be the books you'd read. And once you know that you're interested in it, it's about then getting a foot in the door at an advertising agency. And the way that a lot of people come through is account management. So they don't start in strategy. The number of junior strategist jobs are quite small, but account managers being I like to say that they're trying to hold the candle in a very windy hallway, get all the way down. And that's about like looking after that creative development process, taking it from briefing to the creatives who always, work to the last minute and it's always a mad rush, to then creative production, to then shipping the work out and working with media. Like there's a number of steps there. And that's how a lot of strategists start, is in account management. Or the other way is they're starting in like social strategy, or they might be starting in research houses as well, and then make the jump over. So that's what I did. I started in Australia's first social media agency and slowly made the move over to general planning. I was in comms planning, went from social to digital to comms planning to general strategy.
Well, thank you for that. And you failed to mention your Planning Dirty Academy. Tons of resources on there.
That is definitely for people. I think the kind of niche that I've found is, I guess, what I call like strategy misfits. And this is a lot of people who have kind of found themselves in strategy roles, going from account management or, even designers or creatives. And now they're in the strategy role and they're doing great, but they want the foundations. They're looking for the foundations from how do the best agencies in the world do it? What does strategy actually mean? And that's where I think the Planning Dirty Academy, that's where it's really picked up a lot of people. Those people who have kind of they're great at their job, but now they just want the foundations and to grow from there. And I think that's what the Academy does really well. And then the other thing that I think, I'm sorry to toot my own horn, but the next part about it is the going up into management, because I was able to get up to leading departments over in New York. I've kind of had that experience of understanding what you need to do to actually sell strategy internally into an agency, and then how you actually sell it and scope it into clients, which is no one really shares. And I'm always happy to share that kind of information.
Yeah, we often talk about the selling side of it, because as you said, it's always behind closed doors, and it's just this mysterious thing that you said before. So I'm glad you're sharing a light on that. And that's kind of like why we're interviewing people like yourself. So I wanted to jump back to the creative brief writing. I know you have like a course on this. So could you give us a bit of a rundown of like how to write a rock solid creative brief?
Yeah, for sure. So the briefing format, there's a lot of ways that people write briefs, but the way that I like to write a brief, and the simplest way, is a brief I like to call the get who to buy. And I learned this when I was at BBDO, and it's a really nice, clean, simple brief format. And so the way it works is you've got the get, and then you answer in who the consumer, who the target is. And then the who is the consumer problem, the to is the consumer goal, and the buy is the single-minded message that you want to tell people. So let me give you an example. So if I go to an example for Spotify, Spotify's campaign, Listen Like You Used To, you should definitely check this out. It's an amazing campaign that I always reference. And the idea there was they had realized in Europe that Gen Xers were massive music buyers. They bought they were the highest per dollar value for a consumer demographic. They were spending the most on music. However, they weren't subscribing to Spotify. So Spotify saw this as a massive problem, and they're like, we need to get Gen Xers on the platform. And when they went and did a little bit of research, they realized that music lovers who were in this Gen X age group really loved music, but what they felt was that they were starting to be a little bit more irrelevant. So there's a stat that when you turn 34, you start listening to more older music than newer music. So that's music that was produced in the last year. And so when they started speaking to this audience, what they realized was that this audience was starting to feel irrelevant. And it's a weird age when you're in like this 34, 35. You're like, young, like culture right now, I don't get it. They're starting to not get what culture was about. And so what they realized was that their biggest concern was that they saw Spotify as really cool, and that they weren't cool enough. Like that was for cool young people's music, not for music for us. And so the job for Spotify was to really show, no, we're for everyone. We've got your music that you used to love. So what they did is they took songs that people used to love, or kind of lines that people used to love, and showed that music was still relevant today. So there was ads which was 1991 24-hour party people, 2019 2 to 4 hour party people, or UB40 red wine back in 1992, and now it's. You got to see the ads because it makes sense. In 2019, I was
hoping you'd sing, Julian. I was waiting for the singing, but weird there. We'll move on.
UR40 red wine. So showing just the lyrics are still relevant. Amazing. And so if we look at that brief and we break that down, you would say the audience. Well, we want to get Gen X music lovers. What is the consumer problem there? Well, they're starting to feel irrelevant. So we're going up to kind of like a higher emotional need. is that kind of tension of not feeling kind of relevant anymore. And then what did we want them to do? The buy statement there was to listen or consider a Spotify subscription. And how we were going to do that was show that the music they listen to is as still relevant today as when they listened to it back 20 years ago on Spotify. So what that was doing was it was addressing the consumer problem. You feel irrelevant. You think everything's going past. What we're saying is, hey, wait 1 minute, stop. You're not irrelevant anymore. You're actually, the music's still relevant. And that's coming from Spotify, who they've already got the associations with of this cool brand. So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I am still relevant. And they're addressing that and showing that that music was on Spotify. So the other ads were like, listen like you used to, showing, oh, okay, those songs that I used to love, they're on Spotify as well. So that is how you use the get who to buy statement. And the most important thing is the consumer problem, the who statement there. That's what we, young strategists in agencies, that's what they miss. They often think that, oh, we just want it all positive, or the client gets really excited and they just want to talk about the features and they never tell you what the problem they're solving is. And so like, oh, wait, hold up a minute. And so we really take the time to really understand what the consumer problem is and get that as sharp as possible for the creative team, because that's what they have to jump off. The creative team have to work with that. And that's, if we talk about insights, which is one of the most used terms going around, that is where an insight starts to lie between the who statement, the consumer problem, and the solution. So the way I define an insight, which is from Richard Huntington, is it has to be a revelation. So it has to reveal something new to the consumer. And so with that revelation, it's either doing one of two things. It's either one, revealing something new about the problem, like it's reframing the problem to be something completely else, or it's showing you a new solution that you never thought of. And so you're either doing one of those two things. I can give you an example, or I can stop there as well.
No, keep going. That's reframing or the new solution. Like, how do you actually find it? I think that's the holy grail.
Yeah, and it's not easy. So the thing is another great strategist, John Kenny, who's CSO at FCB, he says, you're lucky if you get to maybe 3 insights a year as a strategist. So we're not getting to them in every brief. It's kind of a fallacy to think you're going to hit it out of the park every time. But we try to get there, and there's a number of exercises you can do to get there. But to show what kind of a problem reframe is, there was this great ad in Portugal. So it was for a dog poo. People weren't picking up their dog poos in parks. And so what actually happened was they tried to reframe that conversation because they'd told people enough. People knew the problem. Pick up your poo, other people stand in it. Not going through, completely blanking on that. So what they did is they had ads which showed poo as like a sundae, like a chocolate sundae or like a cupcake. And what they were saying was, it's actually kids that toddlers are at risk, because if you look at a poo, it kind of does look like a sundae. And so the risk is actually to kids eating that. So it's actually a health risk, and you're risking young kids. And so there, we've got a great reframe, because the problem, it wasn't answering. It was hitting an audience that didn't care. But do you care about the health of children in your community? Maybe you do. And that's the way that's a great example of an insight that reframes a problem. Now, let me show you a solution that's a new solution to a problem. So for Cheetos, what they realized was with young snackers was that young snackers were, they were being asked to do more and more. It's this whole hustle culture of like work 24/7, no break, optimize every single minute. That's what culture was telling them everywhere. And they were exhausted. Snacking time, or when they had snacks, was getting, was under attack. Snacks are usually meant to be your timeout. And so what they realized was Cheetos had this extra power. They had a solution where when you have Cheetos dust on your hands, you can't do anything. You can't pick anything up. You can't help a friend. You can't do anything like that. So Cheetos became the perfect alibi to do nothing, to not help. And so here, the problem's the same, hustle hard culture and kids not wanting to hustle hard and exhausted by it. But now we've found a new solution to that problem, Cheetos dust. And actually, it's an interesting one because it's taking a negative and turning it into a positive.
Yeah, it's amazing. The dog poo story reminded me of another one where a sign was like, what's the reason for not picking up poo? You're a jerk. And I had like multiple check boxes, and it just had a few like bad things, underneath that. So
I always pick my poo up. I'm just saying.
Yours or the dogs?
No, absolutely fantastic. I love that because you're absolutely right about insights. I think sometimes we look at data and then we pull something out and it's like, well, that's obvious, right? You're not revealing anything new. It is just a fact. What's the insight in the fact? And that's where you have to push yourself further to kind of look at that and go, well, why is that happening? What's at the heart of that? Do we really even know what is motivating the consumer to think that, or whatever? And that's where it gets really tough. That's why I always think you've got to, you mentioned quant and qual. You've got to dig into the qualitative, the data, and then you also got to mix that with quantitative. So you've got to go out there and chat to people, or at least have other people go out there and chat to people, so that you kind of get to the bottom of that. Some of those facts and figures. But yeah, really, I think you're right, Jacob. That's the holy grail of strategy, isn't it? If you can find the problem, like you were saying from Richard Rolmuth's good strategy, bad strategy kind of definition, find the problem and then work towards the solution. I assume that's the book you were referring to. Was it this one here?
Yep. Yeah, that's the one. Awesome book. Do you know the other interesting thing about insights is that they have an expiry date? They're like, so for instance, the insight that we love to talk about, is the worst insight ever, which was, young people love experiences over products. So that is just like every strategist wants to shoot themselves when they hear that, because it's like, we've heard it for the 15th time or 1500th time. But, have you ever seen Dos Equis, The Most Interesting Man in the World? It's like great. Well, I'll have to show you the work, because it's like one of the most iconic ads of the 2010s. It's this man who's the most interesting man in the world, and there's these great ads and there's memes that have been created around him. You've probably seen him. He's like the suave old looking man. Anyway, that campaign, the insight that riffs off is that men were going into bars and it was no longer good enough to have like the nice watch and the nice shirts. It was more about the stories that they could tell. That is that exact same insight. It's, men, it was saying men, but it was saying everyone wants experiences over products. And that insight is at one stage, the first time that statement said, it is new and fresh, and that's an insight because it's revealing something new for the first time. But you say it for the 15,000th time, it's gone. It's flat. So that's a really interesting thing about insights too that I find quite fascinating.
I did Google it while you're speaking, and I recognized the face. It's on many memes. Now I put two and two together.
Yep.
All right. Where were we? So I think we're going to wrap up soon. We're getting to the 1 hour mark nearly. But I want to, I guess, like I was going to talk about your Planning Dirty Academy. Like, there's a ton of tools and resources in there. So like, what is the most popular that you find in that, and why do you think that is?
I think it's understanding. There's a couple of things. I think having those fundamentals of how to understand strategy and what is strategy is kind of key. The other thing is the key document. So really helping people understand how to write a great creative brief, how to give great creative feedback, and then the comms framework and the blueprint, because no one's really teaching comms planning a lot to agency people. When I was coming up, it was a very emerging field. And so I feel like that's the stuff that really resonates. And obviously you'd know this too, the community, having a group of people who you can feel like you can trust to review your work. So we've got like a private community where I give feedback on the work and kind of share my knowledge of like what's an agency kind of like gold standard. I think that's what really resonates in the community. So it's those people who feel like they're great at their job, they're nailing it, but they just want to get the foundations and then rise from there as well and have new things to sell and give value to their clients and agency.
I also find that, learning from others and how people do it is super valuable, and getting the feedback from other people, because otherwise you just putting it out and you keep doing the same thing and you're not actually learning. You're applying the same principles to the next project and the next project. So I find that super valuable as well, learning from the community, as you said. Yeah. So could you give us your top 3 pieces of advice for strategists, just to summarize?
It's funny, I should know this like off the top of my head, but
I listened to your first podcast and you had this question, so I was like, put it back on you.
The first thing would be is that 50% of your job is being good at the craft of strategy. The other 50% is being good at diplomacy and understanding the politics of an agency and your client. So understanding how to navigate that is a skill that you need to learn really fast in agencies. And it's something you can learn. So a strategist that I worked with, she was a director, and what she got her junior strategist from day one to do was take notes of the meeting, but then take notes of the what was happening informally. Who was listening to who? What was the body language like when different people spoke? What was the politics that actually played out in the room? And so that is something that you need to, if you start taking notes from the very first meeting, you're going to become really great at the diplomacy side of things. There's a second area of that, which is what I call nemawashi, which is Japanese corporate culture. Big fan of it. And it's pretty much stands for hallways over boardrooms. So you never want to be presenting to more than one senior person at a time. You want to have those conversations around the side and then bring everyone kind of together. The next point would be on imposter syndrome. I think this is something that's prevalent with everyone. Everyone's going to have it. Everyone has imposter syndrome throughout their career as a strategist. The way you improve that is with knowledge. And so you need to, one, be looking to get your kind of foundational knowledge of strategy and how it works. And then also you just need to be, as you were saying, getting feedback on your work. The worst thing I did was when I moved to New York, I was like in the, BBH is seen as like the gold standard of strategy. And I was embarrassed because I'd never come from a strategic background and a great strategy agency. Had the great opportunity to learn from some of the greats, and I kind of closed myself in and didn't want to share any of my work. And I realized that was a massive mistake and it stopped me from growing. So when I started to share, it really kind of elevated me. I'd then say the last piece of advice would be get your time-saving toolkit together. So in the academy, what I've done is like created documents that save you time. So the questions that you need to ask in the client brief, the framework factory, which shows you the different models, the blueprint, examples of different types of creative work. So you've got all that stuff, because what happens, the higher you get up in your strategy career, the less time you get. You're either managing people or you're doing more of the diplomacy and upwards and sidewards, what I call upwards and sidewards diplomacy. So you'll have less and less time. So you need to find ways to be faster.
Love it. Thank you. And last final question, where can people find you?
Excellent. They can find me on Instagram by Julian Cole. Add me on LinkedIn. You can send me a DM on LinkedIn or on Instagram. You'll find me there. And then planningdirty.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I was just blown away by it, like so much of it. So thank you for sharing your knowledge. It was really amazing. So
yeah, thanks
so much,
Julian. It's been absolutely awesome to meet you and to hear from you and get your experience on all those things. I just think you've expanded the subject into ways that perhaps, Jacob and I have not, explored yet. So thanks so much for that. And I can't remember what episode we're on, probably like 40 or something. So, that's a testament to your knowledge and coming in and sharing. So thank you and good luck with all your activities, and we'll definitely be following you.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.